So in The Lord of the Rings, there's something really cool, and it's called the Palantir, so the Seeing Stones. So at the height of its reign, the Kingdom of Gondor had kind of this means of communication, these Seeing Stones, whether it was between Minas Tirith or the East Gate towards Mordor, Isengard, all of these different watchtowers, they had a way of, kind of keeping their realms safe and communicating with each other if something might happen. But as the kingdom kind of deteriorates, what happens is that some of these seeing stones aren't accounted for. So I don't know how familiar you are either with the movies or with the book, but there are three different responses and three different ways that they're kind of utilized by three different people that I think are really cool. And I think the first time we really see them in the book is Pippin. This little hobbit, curiosity always gets the best of him. But he's the first one that we really see using these. So soon after the defeat of the Uruk-hai at Helm's Deep, and there's one scene there which is really cool, just for a quick tangent. But in the book you get this, and in the movie you don't. But there's this one point where right before the rising dawn, Aragorn just comes out right above the gate and just actually speaks to all of the Uruk-hai who are down there, and says, pretty much threatens them, if you value your life, you will leave soon. And they're all laughing at him, but he's there in all of his majestic glory, acting so kingly, and it's just a really cool scene. Well, anyway, after the defeat at Helm's Deep, the Fellowship and King Theoden go to Isengard, and they have this dialogue with Saruman. And Saruman kind of always has this enchanting voice, and he's known for his mysterious wisdom and knowledge. Well, part of that knowledge, and one of the reasons he saw himself as so wise, was because he had and possessed one of these seeing stones at Isengard. And not everyone realized it, only maybe him and maybe Grima Wormtongue, but even Grima Wormtongue didn't realize the full capability of what this could do. Well, after this dialogue, Saruman goes back. Grima Wormtongue actually throws the Palantir down at the Fellowship, probably trying to hit somebody, but misses. Well, Saruman goes back in. Once he realizes that this has happened, he just gives this awful scream, because all of a sudden he's lost all his power. But going back to Pippin, the curious hobbit, he picks this up. Gandalf ends up taking it from him because he realizes what this is and that Pippin shouldn't have it. Well, Pippin, in the middle of the night, finds a way to get hold of it. And upon holding it, he's just kind of overcome and overpowered by Sauron, because Sauron has one of the lost seeing stones that isn't accounted for. And so it's this interesting dynamic where Sauron is able to communicate between anyone else who has these lost seeing stones, these Palantir. But what we find is that not only is he able to communicate, and maybe anyone who has it, including Lord Denethor, as we'll see later, but he's able to kind of start manipulating. And that's what I'll describe in a second. Well, Pippin is overcome and overpowered. But he ends up, he's innocent in it. But it's definitely recognized that he should not continue to have this thing. And so Gandalf, the Grey Wizard, takes it from him. And unannounced to Pippin, he gives it to Aragorn, who is actually the rightful owner of such a tool. Now, Aragorn, having possession of this, is very careful when using this. Aragorn is very careful when using this. And that's important because he sees it as a tool to be wielded. And so there's actually this one point where on his way to Minas Tirith, he uses the Palantir to actually threaten Sauron. He wields it, And again, in his kind of like kingly glory, even though he's not officially a king yet, but you can kind of see like he's kind of rising up to the occasion. And he shows his sword, and he reveals himself to Sauron as the heir of Elendil. It's super cool. So he's the second person that we see wielding a Palantir, and that's a very unique response. Then we see Lord Denethor. So Lord Denethor is in Minas Tirith, the White City. He is the steward of Gondor, and at this point, he's had responsibility for the kingdom, although he's not officially a king. He's just kind of a steward and maintains, but he also has an important responsibility for the defense. In the book, what we see, but we don't see in the movie, is kind of this unique scene. Some of the soldiers of Gondor are talking among themselves and describing what they see happening just a little bit above them in one of the palace sections of Minas Tirith. And they say that sometimes they see the Lord Denethor go into a room, and all of a sudden the room kind of lights up in different ways. Well, what was actually happening to the Lord Denethor, and similar to Saruman, he considered himself wise because he had a knowledge of things that were going on in the kingdom that others didn't. And presumably, at least what he thought, was that he would be able to, make decisions, maybe informed decisions, right? Well, what we actually find is that, he's in a place of responsibility too. He has this authority as the steward to defend the kingdom and to marshal the armies and to do all of this important work as steward. But what we find is that when it comes time and the armies of Mordor are really at the doorstep of Minas Tirith, is that he doesn't respond at all. And why is that? It's because all he's, by looking in this Palantir, what's happened is he's been so brainwashed by just the viewpoint or what Sauron wanted him to see, which was ultimately a perspective of hopelessness. It was a dark perspective, He was missing something. He was seeing what was going around and happening inside the kingdom of Gondor, but just with a bias toward that darkness. And so in the midst of the battle and the disarray, we see leaders try to rise to the occasion. Gandalf shows up, but he's not able to do everything by himself. Ultimately, Aragorn does come to the rescue, but that's before Denethor completely loses hope, burns himself alive, and tries to burn his son alive in the process. So we see all these different responses. And I guess what I wanted to do is kind of relate that to our modern television. It's almost the same thing, I think, because the Palantir is a way for people to communicate with each other. But ultimately, when we look at the news, that was perfect, and politics, we're only shown a certain perspective. And I think we have to be really careful in which perspective we're looking at, because a lot of times these newscasts will have the ability just to give their own narration or to give a certain viewpoint. You see, with the news, there's two components. The first is just information. I'm just watching the TV right now. Just passively absorbing so much information. Don't even know what to do with it, but kind of learning right now everything that's going on in the community throughout the world, all the different highlights and important people involved. That's good. And it's important to turn to a trustworthy news source to do that. But in formulating a response, how do I apply all of this information to my life? And I think that's where the distinction needs to come in. it really shouldn't come from this at all. It shouldn't come from a news agency, whether it's newspaper, TV, or anything like that. Instead, we got to be turning to the revealed Word of God. And even if we read just a small section every single day, I think what we're going to find is that God really does speak in a way that's pertinent and even challenging to every single sphere of our lives. You know, we can actually just in a spirit of prayer, just pour ourselves into the scriptures with all of the chaos and information that we just get from out there. And God is just going to pour himself right back. And we get to take on the mind of God. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. And if you're really kind of just fed up with being passive, and you want to start making some decisive actions in your life, this is where you got to be turning to. Because Jesus says things like, turn the other cheek, or it'd be better for a millstone to be put around your neck and have you thrown in the sea rather than to cause one of these little ones to sin. Or give with your left hand and don't let your right hand know what it's doing. That's the kind of stuff that's going to change the world.